we're here again, and we're getting back after it, trying to discover and learn how we can break out of our molds, how we can be better at sharing the good news of the gospel with our friends and our family. And this is week 3, so we're going to get right after it again and continue that process of getting better together as groups.
And for some people, Nate, we call this initiating spiritual conversation. Yeah. This is the one where people dread maybe. These are the ones where I get a little nervous about the questions and I don't know all the answers. And so I know that as you're watching and listening to this video, we understand that. Yeah. And we're trying to just encourage you to just really trust in God that He'll give you the right words. But we understand that this is probably the week where people are like, oh gosh, I need some practical tips on how to do this.
Yeah. So we're going to start off with giving you 5 principles of a spiritual conversation. These are 5 things that we really think are essential to having a healthy and productive spiritual conversation with your friends or your family or your coworkers.
And they're really more about the background that leads to a spiritual conversation. Maybe that's a better way of saying it, perhaps.
That's probably good. So the first thing we really want to say is that friendships enhance spiritual conversations. We've all been part of just kind of those awkward conversations with somebody on the street that, if you're to die today, where are you going to go? Or can I ask you to fill out this spiritual survey? And we're not trying to slam those. That's not the point of this program.
Because God can use all programs and different methodologies. Absolutely.
Absolutely. But we really come from the conviction that through relationships, that the deeper our relationship with somebody, the better potential for us to really engage in a meaningful spiritual conversation.
It's really odd, and I want to say this. I mean, again, if you're at an airport and then you get on a plane and that plane is going down and you're all going to die, let's have a conversation. But in general, outside of those kind of things, we're trained that there's a lot of honor and respect and dignity when, as a friend, we have these deep conversations as well. I think that's what we're trying to say here.
Yep. So that's principle 1.
And so the second one is what we call identify their worldview. And you may think, gosh, why do I need to do this? Well, in the book, we have 4 different worldviews. And this book we'll actually put on the web somewhere probably as well to download it as a PDF. But basically there's like a modern worldview, a postmodern worldview, a religious worldview, and a practical tech kind of worldview. And so when people are looking at that, they may think, and actually this is the book that we're talking about as I go through this, people actually think that that these worldviews don't matter, but actually they do. Yeah. So when I'm talking to my friends, Nate, just knowing their worldview and how they think, how they reason, or how they find truth, that's really important. And so as you're talking to your family members or friends, not all of them, but for the most part, they're going to have either a modern worldview. And what's a modern worldview? That's more like they believe in absolutes, linear thinking, rational knowledge, books and words, scientist kind of idea. Yeah. The postmodern is a little different, though. They're like, instead of purpose, they believe in play. Instead of linear, cyclical. Instead of one truth, they believe in pluralism. So they're a little different there. In a religious worldview, we happen to be living in Fremont right now. Our church is based in Fremont. So, our neighbors, the grocer, the banker, the person at the gym, the business person, they're all from different cultures. And in general, they have different religious worldviews. So knowing their worldview and their religious worldview matters. But also being in the Silicon Valley, we have a lot of people, what I call practical or techie kind of people. Right. And some of the traits of this is they believe the here and now. We don't care about the afterlife. There might be an afterlife, there may not, but we believe in the here and now. We want to fulfill this so-called American dream, right? I work hard, get the bigger house, get the bigger car. I believe in results. Doesn't matter how I get there, maybe, but I care more about the results. And sometimes if we talk about truth, they might suspend judgment. Now, some of these overlap, I realize that, but knowing the worldview of your friend or family members, that helps us to have these spiritual conversations.
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't understand the perspective or the worldview of the people we're talking to. Sometimes we spend a ton of time answering questions that people just aren't asking. Right? I mean, if you are talking to somebody who comes from a very postmodern worldview, the idea of coming up with exact scientific proofs for faith might not be the most important to that person, right? They're more concerned about the experience that faith can bring into their lives. I mean, again, we're talking ridiculously large generalizations, but it just helps us to kind of think through how we're going to share our faith.
Exactly.
The next thing we have written down here is to be an active listener. Now, this is going to help you to discover worldview. It's going to help you understand your relationship with that person, what are they going through, what's going on in their life. And too often, we can have these normal, healthy conversations about all aspects of our life.
Right.
But when it turns to spiritual matters, we get our little pastor hat on or our little theologian hat on, and we just kind of go through our points. And being an active listener means maybe I need to shut up a little bit and listen to what they have to say. And maybe I need to really try to understand the perspective they're coming from before I try to insert my own perspective.
And Nate, I know we joke about this sometimes, but in a marriage, not everyone's married, I realize that, but in a marriage context, if you do some counseling or different things, you often talk about active listening. And this is what I think you're saying, or this is what I think I'm understanding. And that's really what we're trying to say with our friends. We want to make sure, is this what you believe, or is this what you say is true? We want to listen more carefully instead of just, quote unquote, shoving truth down their throat, so to speak. And yes, at times there's arguments, but we're really trying to move away from that too. We're not saying we're just trying to bombard them with truth. We're actually trying to, obviously we believe in truth, but we're trying to actually listen and be aware of, those kind of traits. So we've talked about real friendships. We've talked about identifying the worldview. You talked about being an active listener. And the fourth one is we have these three roles as well. So I say that we play three roles, and I'm simplifying it, of course, but the first role is an academic scholar. Now, again, that doesn't mean you wear all three hats. As Nate and I said, that you have different friends who are designed differently. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we have to wear more of an academic scholar hat. And what are some traits of these? This person, they study a lot. They value critical thinking. But some of the warnings or things we got to be careful or steer clear of is that this role sometimes becomes very prideful. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm smart, you're not. And I want to argue my point versus love you. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we wear this academic scholar hat. The second role or hat that we wear is just maybe the one that we're most familiar with is the friendship hat. Yeah. And that's when we share life, we support, we build them up, we edify. And I think a lot of us can relate to this relational evangelism, we used to call it. Mm-hmm. But what about the warnings? I know, at least for me, that when I wear my friendship hat, I tend to overlook their beliefs, and I don't challenge them as much because I'm worried about what they're going to think about me, perhaps, and they're my friends, and so I don't challenge them. I'm more apt to challenge someone I don't know. Right. So sometimes when we wear this friendship hat, it's good for edification, it's good to support them, it's good for love. But when they have a different belief or value or ethics, we tend to overlook those values or ethics because they're our friends. Because we want to be accepted and loved. The third hat that we wear, or the third role that I think we tend to wear, and we use this word pastor and shepherd. It doesn't mean it's not just for full-time vocational pastors and shepherds, right? Yeah. But it's the idea that all of us want to help other people. And what I mean by this is when people start sharing their stories, we want to identify how God is working in their life. We want to assess them. It's kind of like going to a doctor. They tell you what's wrong. They tell you, here, take some of these pills or this medicine, you'll be better. That's the role we play sometimes. And what's the warning or be cautious of with this role? Sometimes we just say, just pray about this. Just do it. Just read the scripture, you'll be fine. And I think what we're trying to say here is that we wear these different hats because our friends are different people. And so we're going to have to realize that sometimes we got to be a little more academic. Sometimes we just got to support and love them. And at times we need to spiritually shepherd them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to give us one last kind of principle for these spiritual conversations. I think this actually wraps up so much of what we're already talking about, and might be, in a lot of ways, wrap up a lot of what we're going to talk about all in this whole session, and that is to lead people on a path of self-discovery. Spiritual conversations, evangelism, it is not about winning somebody over to your worldview. And I think that's really important that we change our perspective on this. It is about leading them to Christ and allowing Christ to transform their worldview. And that's a big difference, right? Because if I'm just trying to convince you of my worldview, then I'm talking all about me and how I can, my reasons and my rationale and trying to force that on you. Versus a path of self-discovery is placing truth in front of people and saying, here's how I took these facts, how I took these experiences and developed my worldview, and allow them to be transformed by the Holy Spirit in the same way that the Holy Spirit transformed our lives.
I think self-discovery is an amazing thing. We see little kids all the time do this, right? When we discover something for ourselves, it tends to stick with us longer. And we're human beings. We have pride and different things of this nature. But when I discover, even if you're giving me material, we'll talk about this later, but I discovered for myself, I own it. Yeah. And if I own this truth, if I own this belief, I own this value, I won't tend to keep it. It will sustain me because it wasn't because Nate, was so smart. It wasn't because Ken was so smart. He overwhelmed me with his evidence. No, I studied and I came to that conclusion through my own study and reason or whatever. And therefore, you tend to stick with us longer that way too as well.
Yeah. So like with the other sections, we've got some discussion questions to just help your group really process this. And the first question we have is, what principle or principles are the most challenging for you to practice? So maybe for you, being an active listener, you got that. You're just a very intuitive person. You love to listen to people. But the idea of maybe becoming kind of getting into a role and becoming more of a academic type person.
Yeah, that's hard for some people.
That's intimidating. Or to be a pastor to somebody, that may be scary, or whatever it is. So talk about those in your groups. And then the next question is, what's the importance of leading people on the path of self-discovery? So why is this important? And, we've kind of talked about it a little bit here, but maybe you got some other ideas, or maybe you don't think it's important, and you can talk about that also. So let's spend some time in your groups, and we'll be right back.
Good. Well, glad that you had some time to share in your groups. And as we go through this, now we're going to be more practical, and then we're going to take it to the next step, I should say. And we're going to talk about, and again, initiating spiritual conversation. And we have some principles that we believe that will help you take it to the next level. And I'll be sharing about these 4. Nate will just chime in from time to time to add, of course. The first one is to assess a person's spiritual awareness. And you're probably thinking, wow, that sounds impossible. How can I do that? And so we make some suggestions. And so for some of you, this will work out really well, and others, it may not work as well. But these are some things that we've tried before that have worked in the past. And a lot of these points we've actually already talked about. But we need to build a deeper relationship with people. I know we've already talked about that. But if we're going to assess a person's spiritual awareness, or what they think about spiritual things, spiritual reality, truth, etc., we just have to have a deeper friendship with them.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things, just as we're kind of thinking about this, I think it's always helpful to maybe interact with our friends, our coworkers, in a little bit different environment that might be not an overtly spiritual environment. Not necessarily say, come to a Christian concert with me, but maybe come, let's do outreach together. Our church is doing this Impact Day. We're going to be serving the community. You want to come with us. And all of a sudden, you're in this really a spiritual environment. You're serving together. You're interacting with them. You can start hearing their heart, for what God's doing in their life. Maybe they do have this deep desire in their life to get more involved in outreach, and I believe that comes from the Holy Spirit that's working in our world that is in their lives.
And I think to add a little to that, I think pop culture helps us too. I mean, not everyone likes TV, not everyone's into music and movies, but I think when you talk about, oh, did you see that TV show? And you explore the different characters, you find out what people like or don't like, or what kind of comedy they like, or what kind of characters. People love TV, they love movies, and they love the messages that these movies send out. So I think, or even books. Some people are into books. You find out what their favorite books are, what they like to read. I think what we're saying here is we're not saying, here's a spiritual inventory, Nate. I have 50 questions. I'm going to give it to you, and check out these boxes 1 to 5.
Yeah.
That's not what we're saying. Although there are questions that we want to find answers to, I think what we're saying is that we can find these answers through everyday living.
Yeah.
How they treat their spouse, how they raise their children. I mean, you might even say, well, what do you do on the weekends? I mean, different things of that nature. So we want to assess a person's spiritual awareness. On the other hand, in the book that will be made available to everybody on the website, we do have questions. We have over 35 questions that, again, I wouldn't go up to someone and ask them like this, but I try to find the answers. Like, for example, what would you say to God if you could text him today? I may not say that to you in a direct way, right? But I want to find out, if we could ask God one thing, we all text these days, right?
Yeah.
What would I text to God? Would it be about the evil in the world? Would it be about I lost my mom or something like that? Or how come my parents divorced? Or you're not a fair God. How come you're so unfair? But that tells us something about their awareness. Or question something like this is that, when are you more likely to think about spiritual things? Sometimes when people are going through a health crisis, someone has cancer, and they think about the afterlife. Someone's in war, so a divorce, something like that. So these questions, we're not suggesting again that you go and talk to people about these, but finding the answers to these type of questions through deepening your friendship, that helps us to assess their awareness.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of people, I would venture to say most people consider themselves relatively spiritual at some level. They might not be religious. They might not believe in a God or some sort of absolute, but they have some things in their life that they consider to be spiritual. And so just engaging them on those things, to be able to assess where they're at, what are they thinking about, what are the questions that they're asking and searching out in their life.
Again, it's the principle of knowing our friends and family members so we can meet their needs a little better.
Yeah, exactly.
So as we move to the second one, and we've already, again, mentioned this, but it's connecting people to the Christian community. Small groups, activities. One of the things that we're trying to do this year is Super Bowl week, and maybe you could talk a little about that.
Yeah. So again, that's this week. So if you're watching kind of with the series as they're going, but we really encourage you to go out and to invite friends, family to a Super Bowl party, or maybe your group, your Christian community, they're not into Super Bowl. Maybe it's something else.
Right.
Just get into the lives of your friends. Invite them to get to see the church without necessarily going to church. And I think that's a little different way to look at it. We've had lots and lots of campaigns over the course of churches where it's about inviting somebody to church, to a worship service. And
nothing's wrong with that.
No.
And we should keep doing that.
Right.
But sometimes, depending on their background, again, this is the spiritual awareness, right?
Yeah.
Some people go to church and we have this great worship pastor at our church, right, Harry?
Totally.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool guy. But Harry's up there leading, and if I am unchurched, I don't even know what he's singing, man. I mean, that language doesn't appeal to me, maybe. But because I'm not unaware of my friend's awareness. So that's what we're trying to say, that if someone is seeking and they want to know truth, perhaps church is the next step. But by knowing the spiritual awareness, we connect them to a Christian community. It's not only on a Sunday morning, we're saying, right? We're saying there's different ways for them to hang out with our Christian friends.
Yeah, and again, going back to that outreach vein that we've been talking about, really, we've discovered this last Christmas, we had so many people from outside of our church, from different religious backgrounds, that have come and served with us because they desire to serve, to do something, to, embrace the season of Christmas, whatever their reasoning for. But we just really found that as an awesome way for them to get to experience the church, not by going to church, but by being part of the church even before they were ready or willing or interested in accepting Christ. They get to experience the church.
So principle 2, just to remind people, is to connect people to a Christian community. And knowing their awareness, that could be a Sunday service, it could be a small group Bible study, but it can easily be a social, a lunch. It could be an activity of serving the community and different things of that nature.
Yeah.
So let's move to number 3.
Yeah.
It's called gospel-centered transitions. And this is like, wow, a big word. You think, how in the world, Nate, am I going to do this? The person is probably listening. I haven't gone to seminary.
Yeah.
I haven't gone to Bible college. You're a pastor, Nate, and Ken, and et cetera, and this is your job.
Yeah.
I don't have the gift of evangelism. How am I going to use gospel-centered transitions? And all we're really trying to say now is that when we're in a discussion with our friends or family member, it gets off to the right, we just bring it back to the center. It gets off to the left, and it brings it back to the center. That's all we're really trying to say here. So let me give you a few examples as you're listening. So you talked about Impact Day, and inviting people to do this. So a friend may come up to you, Nate, and say, well, why does your church do this? So what do I mean by gospel-centered transition? Nate or I would say, I'm glad we can help. We like to serve because we want to share God's love. That's all we're trying to say. So it brings it back to God. It brings it back to Jesus. It brings it back to the Scriptures. That's all we're trying to say. Or this may sound silly, but some people like read different magazines online and different things. We might want to say, did you see the cover of this magazine, magazine, or this magazine? Did you read the article of this? On the internet, I read this, this, and that. What do you think about it? So we're just, again, trying to not dominate the conversation. We're trying to control it a little, but bring it back to the gospel.
You know what's funny about this is I think usually when I do this in my life, I discover that I'm the one in the conversation most tentative about having these spiritual, gospel-centered conversations. More often than not, when I transition a conversation with my friends to aspects of the gospel, they're good with it. They're engaged in it, right? They're thinking about spiritual things, and even if they don't agree with me, they're good to talk about these things. And so it's the natural way of bringing conversations around. And hopefully we're really not advocating for just awkward transitions, right? You say, hey, my mom died last week, and you're going, well, let me tell you about heaven, and without not caring. Again, we want to care about people. We want to engage people. We want to be active listeners. So it's really in gentle and natural ways having these gospel-centered conversations.
And again, it's knowing your family member or friend. But here's one that I think many people have used before. It's like if your friend or family member is really going through a hard time, they're going through a crisis. Of course, again, we come alongside them. But we may say something like this. It looks or it sounds like you're going through a really difficult time. Would it be okay if I prayed for you?
Yeah.
I mean, most people, even if they don't believe in prayer, they're more than, okay, yeah, you can pray for me.
Yeah.
And it's again, we want to see God work in their lives. But now they're going to go back to us and say, remember you prayed for me a week ago, Nate? Yeah. Remember a month ago, Ken, you prayed about this financial crisis? I don't know what happened, but... And I think that's what we're trying to say is that you take everyday situations, everyday life, and we just put a little transition into that points them to the gospel, points them to the Bible.
That's great.
So that's the third one. The fourth one is we want to provide opportunities for people to respond to biblical truth. And there's so many different ways of doing this. I mean, books, DVDs, music, and again, serving opportunities. We keep plugging Impact Day or different things because of the importance of it.
Yeah, no, I think this is so important. Again, we're talking about self-discovery. It's not about us pushing our worldview, but it's putting things in front of people so that they can see and discover Christ. And this is pretty normal, right? I mean, we share stories with each other we find interesting. If you see even a pretty controversial, thought-provoking YouTube video, you might just post it on your wall for other people to say. But sometimes for us as Christians, when it comes to putting spiritual truth in front of people, biblical truth in front of people, we're resistance to that. And so,
I mean, I have a friend, Nate, for example. He just on Facebook, for example,
Yeah.
he just puts like 3 or 4 words, something provocative about justice or truth or politics.
Yeah.
And people know he's a Christian, but he has people responding all the time. He's just trying to respond to the truth of different things, and that's all he does. He's on Facebook and he makes friends. And he just brings up issues and allows people to interact with what truth is, to give them an opportunity.
So great. We've given you guys 4 kind of principles or 4 ideas in initiating spiritual conversations. First, you got to assess the person's spiritual kind of awareness, their spiritual climate. You want to connect those people with the greater spiritual community.
Yes.
Again, it's not a one-on-one sort of deal. It's us and our communities. Third is really create these gospel-centered transitions.
So you want to bring it back to God and the Bible.
Right. It's not just about interfaith dialogue. It's not just about deep, esoteric concepts, right? This is about Jesus.
Exactly.
And then the last point is provide opportunities for people to interact with biblical material. Not just about us. It's about the Bible.
And I think, Nate, that's a good point, because I think sometimes we think that people don't want to know about truth,
Right.
because we hear a lot about relativism.
Yeah.
But when we quote unquote push people, they do believe in truth. That father who says he doesn't believe in absolute truth, all of a sudden you take his house from him, you cut him off at the car, you beat his kid. I think he's going to call for justice, which means there's an element of truth. I guess my point really is saying this is that I think people actually want truth. People want to know that they can hang on to something in the world that's, quote, dissipates.
Yeah.
They're looking for truth. I really believe so. And so sometimes we're intimidated by this, but we should allow people an opportunity to respond to truth, because I think people are looking for it.
Oh, that's great. Well, let's give the group some time to interact and to ask them to talk about this. So we got 2 questions for you again. First question is, think about your 5 friends and as kind of share openly and kind of think about how would you assess their spiritual awareness. And maybe you don't have time if you're in a bigger group to share about each of your friends. Pick a friend.
Yeah, just pick one, maybe. Yeah.
Just kind of think about where they at spiritually. And if you don't know, that's okay. But just kind of summarize and assume and just think about that. Then the next question are, what are some advantages of inviting a person to be a part of a Christian community as opposed to sharing the gospel with them one-on-one? So what are the advantages of that? How can the community, the body of Christ, enhance that experience of sharing the gospel?
Well, we're glad. I hope you had a good group discussion. And one of the things we're really trying to do is just practice in our groups. And so here's another role play. And we want you specifically to practice these gospel-centered transitions. You're probably thinking, wow, these are hard, actually, to be honest, Nate. But in that book, again, you can look at these. We have like about 30 different examples to practice. But I'm going to maybe just highlight a few just to share a few with people. So let's say someone's having conflict at home, interpersonal relationships at work. We can say something like this: thanks for sharing. Resolving conflict at home or in the workplace is an important issue. May I share how God has helped me resolve these issues? Sure. So we're just putting God into the equation. Okay. Here's another example. Someone maybe is reading Genesis chapter 1 and think, oh, how can Christians believe in the book of Genesis? Science disproves it. We're not getting into an argument, we might want to say this. That's a good point. The book of Genesis has often intrigued people. Did you know there are different interpretations of Genesis? May I explain a few different ones that are compatible with science? So again, these are gospel-centered transitions. We're not getting into deep arguments. We're trying to compliment them first, affirm them, active listening, and then say, here's a different way of looking at it. Maybe just one more example, if that's okay.
Sure.
So let's say we're talking to someone who just loves serving. We've been talking about serving. We might say something like this: it's great, Nate, that you enjoy serving and helping other people. This is one of the reasons why I'm attracted to Jesus. And you're probably thinking, what, really? Were you aware that Jesus reached out to the hurting, to those in pain, to the marginalized? I think a lot of people forget that about Jesus. And so again, we're taking their point, we affirm, hey, that's a great thing. You're reaching out to people, and we're pointing it back to the gospel. So again, the booklet, it can be made available to you. You can look them up for practice. But take about 10 minutes right now and practice gospel transitions.
Well, I just really thank you for being part of this 3-week series as we together really discover how we can break out of our molds and be more open and authentic about our lives with our non-Christian friends as we share the gospel in ways that are personal and relational and life transformational, we trust and we hope.
And we think, and I think Nate and I agree with this because this is something we practice, Nate. I mean, it's kind of like riding a bike. It's kind of doing new things. At first, it might be a little intimidating, but once we learn how to move those pedals, we can ride a bike. And I think that's what we're trying to say in spiritual conversations, that maybe the first two, we kind of fall, we cut our leg, we fall down, hurt our elbow. We're on training wheels, but eventually we're going to learn how to ride that bike. And the more times we do this, I think the more comfortable we become.
Absolutely. So I'd like to just close us out of here in prayer and pray for your groups. And then as we get done, I encourage you to spend some time, again, sharing in your life group about your 5 friends that you're praying for, and encourage each other and pray for those friends. So let me pray for your groups. God, you have rescued us. You have searched us out and found us in the midst of our sin and our shame and our guilt. And we know that you are doing the same in the lives of our friends. And we just are honored that we get to be a part of that process, that you have entrusted us the story of the gospel, the story of your Son and your salvation. So we just pray that that we're good stewards of that responsibility, that we share you well, that we make the best use of our conversations, that we don't waste our lives away in living unintentionally, but we intentionally engage in the story of the gospel. So God, I pray for these life groups. I pray just that you continue to knit them together, that they can hold each other accountable and build each other up and support each other as they take part in this journey of breaking the mold. God, we praise you and we worship you. Amen. Amen. Thanks for watching.